Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. We've got a very special guest today. That is Guy Anderson. We're going to be talking all about his fantastic work around Tartaria, global resets, why some people are waking up and others aren't, and how this all ties together with the elites and their manipulation of humanity in our consciousness and what we're fed to believe is our history versus what might be our true history. So thanks so much for joining us, Guy.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
And you've been producing some fantastic work, but what's your background? How did you get started on this journey down these rabbit holes?
It goes back to, I suppose, probably the mid 80s. Um, my dad was a master Freemason and incredibly ahead of his time with conspiracy theories. He was reading books that only now people are starting to talk about. And one day I cracked open his briefcase, the one that he takes to lodge meetings. And it took me ages to work out what the code was. It's one of these briefcases with three. You've got to get the three numbers either side of the locks, and I realised it was our phone number. So after days of sort of every now and again going up there having another go, I cracked it and I found his stuff, and I was just, I suppose, overwhelmed by it all. Books with words that were in code and a Bible that I hadn't seen before, and his apron and gloves and I was just absolutely fascinated. And I asked him what it was all about, and my mum piped up and said he puts his apron on and they go and bake cakes together. It's a silly little boys' club. And he turned around and said, "You can laugh as much as you like. They run the world." And that never left me. So when I was old enough, I joined. And I was fortunate enough to be invited to join a lodge that meets at the Grand Lodge of the United Kingdom in London, central London, where everybody, including the Duke of Kent, meet. So I started to see Knights Templars and really high-ranking Freemasons, government officials, the flying squad at Scotland Yard. You know, they were all meeting there, and I was exposed to quite a lot of information. I was exposed to how the voting system works, which was surprising, and I started reading the books that my dad um, had bought years ago that were a little bit too deep for me to read in my teens. Atlantis to the Sphinx, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. Then I started reading David Icke's work. I'm fortunate enough to now work with his sons. Um, so my journey goes back a very, very long way. You know, I'm talking, nearly 40 years. But Tartaria wasn't on my radar until just before the pandemic, and I stumbled across someone called Max Egan.
Yeah,
I'm sure you know Max,
love Max.
and I said to him that this is fascinating. This is the biggest conspiracy of them all. Forget did we land on the moon and 9/11 and JFK. If they can erase an entire empire for them from the face of the earth and add 800 years to our timeline, that is the biggest lie ever and the biggest act of genocide that's ever existed. And I then realized that the more I dug, the more Tartaria was becoming not a rabbit hole but a warren, because it connected Nikola Tesla, cathedrals, harnessing energy from the ether, repopulation through cloning, child trafficking, absolutely everything, and linking it all back to one family and one bloodline, going back right to the very beginning of our creation. And I just started to obsess, and it took over my life. And I started buying old books that were quite hard to find and quite expensive, anything with a reference to Tartaria or Tartary in it. And I compiled notes, and these notes turned into a book. And my wife said to me, you should tidy that up and publish that. I said, well, I've written this all down because I want to preserve it for my children and their children, future generations, so they can look at it and see, what I uncovered. And she said, no, you should start a Facebook group, and you should see if anybody wants to talk about it on YouTube. And so I turned it into a book, put it on Facebook, published it, and then I ended up, fast forward 18 months, and here I am, and I've sold thousands of copies, and been on, crikey, I don't know how many podcast interviews,
Yeah.
and it's all by accident.
It's amazing, isn't it? When you're passionate about something, you can kind of turn it into a hobby or a job. And I've got a book from 1800 which describes a traveller's travels through Tartaria. For people at home that don't want to believe this or dismiss it as conspiracy, we've got all the old maps, 1500s, 1600s that label these regions as Tartaria or similar names. And so there's so much evidence out there. And I think that's what people are waking up to, all these things, that you can't just go to Google and Google something.
Oh God, no.
You're completely getting the mainstream censored version of truth on any topic. And we're lucky that we have a bit of freedom of speech on X, Rumble, BitChute, these other, and even YouTube now is allowing Tartaria video. So it's a big step in the right direction. But what would you say for people that haven't gone down the Tartaria rabbit hole? What's the quick version, the one-on-one of like what it is?
Okay, well, first of all, as you quite rightly said, you can't dismiss it. It is a conspiracy, because conspiracies are a group of people doing something that conspires against us. So it absolutely is a conspiracy by definition, but it can't be dismissed as being myth or pseudoscience, because the evidence is everywhere.
Yes.
So basically, Tartaria itself is a region. It's Russia, Eastern Europe, and Asia. But the ethos and the period of time is actually what we refer to as Grand Tartaria. That's the period of time. It's 1,000 years, from almost year zero to 976 AD. 976 AD to you and I is 1776, because 800 years were added. And the Jesuits did this. And a Russian mathematician called Anatoly Fomenko cracked it. And now other people are looking at our timeline. And we can see that they invented a period called the Dark Ages and gave us a slow progression of evolution with regard to us as people and technology and how we build. So the ethos span across the earth, and that's why you can find buildings in New Zealand, Tasmania, where you are, South America, China, England, Canada, everywhere in the world, there are buildings that look very similar, this Greco-Roman style.
Yes.
Without anybody at that point when they were built being able to share information. So how these buildings popped up, if we follow the mainstream narrative, it doesn't work, because there was no influence in certain parts of the world to design and construct in this way. So Tartaria is also known as, or the period is known as, the Old World, the Classical World, or the Millennial Reign of Christ. It aligns with the 1,000-year period where things were built by the angels. And by that, people that were just of a higher level of intelligence to us. And that is the previous civilization. They were wiped out. The Jesuits, funded by the Rockefellers, spent a considerable amount of time, money, and effort removing every single trace of them from the pages of history. So books were burnt and removed. People that had information, the information was bought from them, and then the people were disposed of. And this happened everywhere, but more so in Russia. And the reason being is because they were about to bring out the Industrial Revolution and the petroleum industry, the internal combustion engine, and so on. There was money to be made by removing free energy for a very small group of people. And so that's what they did. They wanted to remove the people. They wanted to remove free energy. We saw slowly going into the early 1900s, electric vehicles almost banned, but with the infrastructure being stripped. Also, certain people could financially benefit. But ultimately, they lived in balance and harmony. Everything was built to resonate at 432 hertz. So people had a sense of euphoria permanently. People were healthy. We didn't have laws and restrictions. We had free travel and movement. The right to worship any religion without it being ridiculed or you being targeted and divided into small groups and then attacked in a kind of divide and conquer tactic that they're doing now all over the world. So it was a time of peace and harmony, and that's why it's referred to as the millennial reign of Christ. Then we have New World Order, which started on the 4th of July 1776, also referred to as Satan's Little Season, a period of time where everything is inverted and it becomes kind of us being poisoned and pushed into a darker side and a lower vibration, with alcohol being pushed, pornography, gambling, sports, so we can hate each other because we don't like the same team, and huge division at the hands of these bloodline families.
Yeah. Yeah, not just that. It's as you say, they might have been more intelligent, but I think we maybe still have that same potential within us. But it's the constant, fluoride, the genetically modified foods, poisoning of our air, water, skies, and our minds through the screens and everything that is fed to us from birth. Now that once you crack that, you almost feel like you're free, and this is what a lot of people want to refer to as waking up. It's like your consciousness is expanded. You have this feeling within you that there's something more, and I think Tartaria and learning about it is all of this is one big part of that.
Yeah, I agree. And as I said to you before we started recording, from my research and looking at Dolores Cannon and Nostradamus, we can't wake everybody up. And there is a reason for that we're carrying, some of us descend from the previous civilization. Most of them were killed through civil wars, genocide, famine, and disease. But those that remained, we are our ancestors. And I believe that the people that are awake, that are wide awake and looking at Tartaria and questioning other things as well, are doing so because their DNA is carrying the memory of their ancestors, and they know that they're living in a time when things aren't right. We're not supposed to live like this.
Yes.
And they can't let it go. It eats away. But then 80% of the population are the result of cloning that took place in the 1800s. They don't carry that information in their DNA. Their history was rewritten for them. So they don't question things like we do. Everything is it's just how it is. It is what it is. Yeah. You'll hear them say that.
It's fascinating with the Australian connection as well, because when a lot of the scientists first came here, they were obsessed with Aboriginals and the DNA and the uniqueness of their genetics and that type of thing. As you say, maybe because people speculate they're one of the last untouched groups of people that have survived these resets and that type of thing.
Yeah, and what history has done is whitewashed everything. So it's so the Jesuits and these bloodline families, the Rothschilds and so on, what they've done is they've tried to make every indigenous tribe, every ethnic group that isn't every group of people that aren't Caucasian as being technologically inferior. That everything that's ever happened that's been a significant scientific breakthrough or an advancement in architecture, mathematics, science, whatever, it's all been whitewashed, and they've taken credit for things that they haven't done. They've taken credit for things that were created, built, and designed by the previous civilization, and the World's Fairs were a good example of this. They would have indigenous tribes on display, and they would refer to them as savage and primitive. Their ancestors are the ones that built these cathedrals and the star forts, and everything has been completely and utterly inverted and whitewashed in favour of the Caucasian. Yeah. And so what I'm doing is kind of trying to correct right or wrong, I suppose, and show that it wasn't the white settlers from England that built all of these incredible buildings and structures in Australia. They were already there, and it's the same story all over the world. And some people say, "Oh, this guy is just doing the thing where white people are supposed to hate each other now." I don't care what colour somebody is, what religion they are. I'm righting a wrong. I'm correcting history with my work. It doesn't matter to me what colour or ethnicity someone is. If there's an element of history that is falsified, I will try and correct it, regardless of the outcome.
Well, it's not you or I, as you say. It's the elite ruling bloodline families. It doesn't matter what colour or creed they are. It's always the
it's the Rothschilds ultimately. Yeah, the Rothschilds are at the root of all of it.
Yes. So I'll just bring up those photos again for people at home. But I guess, yourself, My Lunch Break is another good channel. What people have gone back and done is break down the official story. And often it's, built in a year or two, or the World Fair where they say they're just temporary, these incredible buildings. And the architecture that's based around sound and harmonics and those types of things. If people have seen, the sand on the speakers and Tesla was talking about the importance of sound and frequency vibration. So, what do you think are the sort of best bits of evidence to show that these buildings were built with some sort of technology that we've clearly lost? And does that go all the way back to the pyramids, the same type of stuff, possibly?
Yeah. So Grand Tartaria. I used to say to people that it's an echo of Atlantis. It's Atlantean technology. To harness energy from the ether is Atlantean technology. And to build using cymatics, where you're using sound to construct, to make sure that buildings resonate. So we've got these wonderful old world buildings and cathedrals and star forts and so on. And then you look at what we build today, these blocks, these sort of rectangular blocks, this brutalistic, very depressing and low vibrational design.
Like
That's
cubes,
designed to
basically.
do the work. Yeah, so it's designed to do the opposite.
Yeah.
Keep you subdued in a very low vibrational state, easier to manipulate and employ. So if you are, even, if you're in one of these lovely tower blocks, what ultimately is a white collar factory, you're not on a production line anymore. You're now in a little booth, and you kind of think it's cool because you've got a lovely view out the window, but you don't realize the damage that's being caused to you inside that building with EMF, screen, the vibration of the building itself and the room you're in. The biggest evidence of the old world is probably the star forts. I would argue it's the star forts. Now, the Smithsonian's Institute will tell you that they were created as defensive fortresses. But what they don't explain is why they happen to resonate at 432 hertz and align to constellations. Now, that, by anyone's measurement, is not part of a strategy for building a defense or a fortress. It must align to constellations if we're going to be able to fend off the enemy, So star forts that they, even the Smithsonian's do, in fairness to them, and I despise them. I enthusiastically despise the Smithsonian's. They actually state that they do not understand why they are built the way they are.
Yeah.
Therefore, their explanation of who built them goes out the window, and why they were built. And many of them are in places that would not serve as a defensive fortress. They just wouldn't. They're in places where there wouldn't be a need for one, in the middle of nowhere. So I would get people to look at star forts. I believe that, first of all, you'll find if you're lucky enough to go to one, and there's hundreds of them across the world, and we've got two not too far away from us, stand in the centre. Just stand in the centre, close your eyes, ground yourself, so take your shoes and socks off, and just stand in the centre of the star fort, and then just feel. And you'll see what these were designed to do. They're huge energy systems, and they're all connected. All of them across the world are connected with tunnels.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned...
You can get from one to the other.
You mentioned Tasmania as well. There's a star fort directly below our largest sports stadium down in Hobart in Tasmania. And then, like we said, we've got pyramids, old pyramids across Australia, sphinxes and eroded. And then we've got all the cave drawings. And I've got friends that have been in those ancient tunnels and that type of thing. So it all really... we don't have an explanation, particularly for all these tunnels that span these vast distances before, electricity, power tools and stuff like that. It is just crazy, but it takes those eyes to see, to go, hold on, this is ridiculous, because people have never been told before.
Yeah, and there are tunnels all across the world. I don't know. I've seen no evidence of this, but I like to think that it happened. But many people believe that these tunnels were travelled in, and they were using vacuum trains to do so. So you could get from one place to another really quickly. I mean, we're talking in seconds.
Okay.
And in America, Elon Musk has started his boring company building tunnels.
Yeah.
Tunnels specifically for Tesla owners to be able to get from A to B faster and beat the traffic. And he's not. What he's doing is he's opening up tunnels that were already there.
Yeah.
And people have been using these tunnels for a long time. The government still use them. Deep state use them. High-ranking officials still use them. So that's why we never pull up in a traffic jam and see the Prime Minister next to us, Elon Musk or Zuckerberg. You won't. They use a completely different network
Yes.
to the rest of us.
The other interesting means of transport is the blimps, hot air balloons. Do you believe that they were a big part of Tartaria, and that Hindenburg was, the kind of the big false flag to end that mode of transport for good?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, in favour really of the Industrial Revolution and the push to using planes. Because Rockefeller had the Standard Oil Company. Rockefeller is a Rothschild family, a spin-off, if you like, and they wanted control over travel, but also they wanted to restrict people.
Yeah.
And so that's when you started to need more documentation to travel, because some people refer to Grand Tartaria, the 1,000-year period of Grand Tartaria, as being the empire of free travel.
Yeah.
Because people could use, and they would dock at docking stations. Perhaps the most famous docking station in the world would be the Eiffel Tower. So you would embark and disembark at key places across the world, and you could go anywhere you wanted. Now, so they wanted to restrict our movement. They wanted to enforce maritime, admiralty, and cabotage laws,
Yes.
to be able to control the movement of people and goods. But at the same time, there was money to be made from getting rid of the airships and pushing towards the plane.
Yeah.
A lot of money in the fuel,
Yes.
and it's the same people, and it's normally twofold. I mean, now it's nothing to do with money because we have fiat currency. So, when you pay tax, it doesn't matter if you paid or not. They've got more. They invent money and
Yeah.
put zeros on their bank. So it's about hurting you and controlling you.
Yeah.
And but back then, it was about the money. They wanted to earn incredible wealth from you, from everything you did, but they also wanted to control how you did it.
Yes.
So whether that's what you bought or how you travelled. And now, of course, we need to remove the money from it because it's not real anymore.
Yeah.
It's all just about control and keeping people subdued and in little boxes.
Yes. What else do you think was part of that old world? With the Vatican and all the halls of secrets and the Smithsonian Institute and papers in the 1800s. I think it was one of the US presidents talking about things like giants and these giant skeletons that were being found. So all of that, do you think this ties into this old world where we had those type of different whatever you want to call them, creatures or species and that type of thing that was all now swept under the rug?
Yeah, and the Smithsonian did a very good job of that. And you'll see that a lot of the skeletons that are found that are giant do tend to be in America. America's probably the oldest civilization on Earth. It predates everything. Even Noah's Ark, the wood that it was constructed from, it can only be found in Florida. You've got the Grand Canyon, you've got the Badlands, which is a melted city. And what they've done is they've tried to, as best they can, hide everything. So people have, especially in the 1800s, as you said, there were people uncovering giant skeletons all the time. And now it's just suppressed. They go to the Smithsonian's, they end up in a warehouse that's got an asbestos issue or a leak or floods, or they lose them. And they've done that with absolutely everything. But in Bolivia, they still have them on display, and the elongated skulls too. So yes, they've tried to suppress the fact that giants lived amongst us. And then we see when we were coming out of the Tartarian Empire or the millennial reign, the introduction more so of fables to do with giants. And from a very early age, we're indoctrinated with the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, and that giants are ogres. But if you look in the Bible, and if anyone studies The key figures in the Bible, like Moses or Noah, for example, or even Adam, they were significantly taller than us. So these buildings with the huge doors that are sort of 12, 20 feet high and windows that are too high up to be able to look out of weren't built for us. Some of the buildings were built for both of us, some were built for us, and some were built for the giants. But we lived in harmony, we lived together. And people can go onto the internet and type in photographs of giants. Um, once you get past all of the people who clearly have a genetic mutation or a disorder or giantism, you can see that actually there are hundreds and hundreds of images out there of people all across the world that were substantially taller than us and often married. People our
Yeah.
height, regular sized people. And the reason that they were growing to a um, higher than us or taller than us is the same reason that trees were as well, and fruit and animals and vegetation. There was a higher level of oxygen in the atmosphere. So things grew bigger. We've been stifled. Everything that we grow now is stifled. We're stifled because the oxygen level has been reduced. And this was achieved by spiking the grid. So the grid, the electric circuit that we live on, it was spiked, and that caused earthquakes, mud floods, fires, um, and just normal flooding and tsunamis all across the earth. The ultimate goal was not just to destroy the grid, but it was also to cover a lot of architecture that they couldn't explain and bury certain parts of buildings underground. So all you now see is the top of a church. When you see a church, you're not seeing how actually how big that structure is. It's a lot bigger and wider. You're only seeing the peak of it, the top level, if you like.
Yeah.
So they put graveyards around them so you can't excavate. Then they built golf courses. They flooded lots of areas that were in valleys as well and turned them into lakes. So this was all done at the same time by spiking the grid.
Yeah. Do you think a lot of people now have woken up to the climate manipulation, geoengineering, and that type of thing. Do you think that the reset was more of like a natural phenomenon and tied into the energy grid you've mentioned, or you believe that they would probably had advanced technologies to really reset everything back then?
Yeah,
Yeah.
So it was a spike. It was a huge spike to the energy grid that was intentional,
Okay.
and then a series of attacks across the world using direct energy weapons.
Yeah. And do you believe that this happened? Some people say it's every 300 years, or do you believe it was about 300 years ago, or is there another one 12,000 years ago when people talk about this Younger Dryas period in the pyramids? Or what are your sort of timelines around when these resets happened?
The resets aren't natural. The resets are caused, and they vary. It's planned a very, very long time ago. But normally, the reset that we're going through now is because the same thing has happened again. We've reached a point where we have too much information. We're too independent. We're fighting back and talking out against the system. We're refusing to comply with certain things. So it's time for us to be reset. Last time they did it, the consequence was, I mean, it was a slow burn. It took the Jesuits about 100 years to infiltrate everywhere, and then through a series of events, get rid of the population, orchestrate wars,
Yeah.
cut off food supplies and food chains, and so on. So it's very well planned in advance. Agenda 21 and Agenda 30, we know, are ultimately about depopulation, the restriction of movement, followed by forced medical interventions that are ultimately going to kill us. And they're doing it through the food, as you said. Our pineal glands are calcified now because of the fluoride in water and toothpaste. We're spraying aluminium with deodorant into our lymph nodes and then wondering why we're seeing breast cancer at the levels it's at. So we are being poisoned, but it's done. We're attacked from different angles, so it can't be pinpointed, and that's kind of key for them. And obviously, the medical intervention was designed to weaken our immune system. Because of one of the elements of what they put in the jab, designed to wipe our immune system out. But it's a slow burn. They don't want anybody overnight dropping down, or hundreds of people, millions of people dropping down, and people saying, well, yesterday all of them had this put into their system. So it's a slow burn, but people are waking up to it now. But yeah, they reset at certain periods. This is 250 years after the last reset. But my fear is now they won't have to repopulate with people. They've got AI. They've got us to use AI, ChatGPT, things like this, to a point where it knows so much about how we all think that it can replace us and even our thoughts. So I think that the next reset, we're going to lose an incredible number of people. The majority of people walking around right now will not be here when this is over unless we do something.
Yeah, and that's why we do these videos, to try and wake people up. But as you say, that's one thing that I've been talking about as well. It's death by 1,000 cuts, so that it's almost too hard for someone to notice. And then if someone ever does, they can kind of squash it or push back, or plausible deniability, because it is death by 1,000 cuts. But I know what you want to get into next, because you just touched on how we can't wake some people up. So maybe before we get into that, I want to touch on, well, where did the bodies go from the last reset? Is that these holes at the Vaticans with, kilometers and kilometers of bones, and we're constantly digging up these mass graves? So yeah, where do you think the bodies before the reset and repopulation?
Well, as you quite rightly said, catacombs, a lot of them are on display. Catacombs are displays. They served as a warning. This is what happened to the last lot that tried to rise up against us and would not comply to New World Order. We killed them all. But they're also trophy cabinets. And people think of the catacombs, immediately with Paris in their minds. There are catacombs all over the world. Everywhere. I mean, we've got one here in Edinburgh, but there'll be one in London. They'll be everywhere. It's just you don't know about them. We're not told about them, but still, a lot of them you can actually go and visit. But there are a lot more than that. But it's actually slightly worse. We not only had mass burial grounds and mass graves, and we would say that it was the cause of the plague or something like that or an outbreak. And of course, these are all man-made. These are designed to depopulate, like the Spanish flu was. But the Napoleonic Wars are probably the most dramatic example of what you do with the people that fell and died, the millions of people that died in the Napoleonic Wars. Unfortunately, the bodies were brought back to England and used as fertilizer. So we ate them. The teeth were removed, and they became the most popular dentures of the time. They were referred to as Waterloo teeth. And then the bones of a lot of people, with the exception of the skull, the bones were used to create bone china. So you could argue that if you lived in Europe, and in particular in Britain, during that period of time, you indirectly ate them. If you had money, you ate off them. And if you had even more money, you were using their teeth to eat them as well. That's what they did. And that is kind of how they work. The pleasure and enjoyment they would have got from watching us eating food, vegetables that were grown through the remains of our forefathers and our ancestors, it just fills them with joy.
Yeah, there's no doubt that people running the world are psychopaths. Yes.
Yeah, they despise us. And they despise us because they don't see us as being the same species as them. We are ants to step on. We serve a purpose to perform a function in infrastructure, but we're not to marry their families. We're not to have any involvement with them. They're not our friends. They see us as different. And that is because they are not human.
Yeah.
They look it, but they're not.
I had an MK Ultra Illuminati family survivor on the other day, and he was talking about this specifically, about the bloodlines and how they've, more and more people are waking up to how these royals and the wealthy interbreed and keep it and remarry to protect that, the bloodline and the genetics. That seems to be something different to ours. And you spoke about that elongated skull, and even Rothschilds from the side on have got quite an elongated skull profile to this day. So where do you think that sort of origin comes from? Is it, again, when the Bible talks about, Nephilim and different cultures talking about being interfered with genetically and created that type of thing, or what's your theory?
Well, the Bible, obviously, the Old Testament is based upon the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is obviously far older. It's all in there. Even the story of the flood is in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it predates the Bible by a few thousand years. So everything's based upon that. And then obviously you've got the Torah, and the King James Bible is a far more the one that we all read now if we go to church. That's obviously the most modern of them all. So the story is of the Anunnaki, or the Elohim, beings that came from somewhere else that were taller than us, more advanced than us, and genetically modified Neanderthal man. They had an elongated skull, and you can see that with some of the pharaohs as well. Nefertiti, for example. It's a different species, but we have an element of them. If we remove the Anunnaki from us, then we would be Neanderthal man. So they tweaked us and created a slave race to mine for them. But Enki, the scientists that really ultimately made us, Enki and Enlil, who are gods in the Old Testament, because in the Old Testament God is plural, so the gods that created us, also mated with their creations. And one of the most famous children or offspring, if you like, would be Gilgamesh. So he was one of them. And then Marduk also did the same thing. Marduk, who's the son of Enki, he also mated with their creation. They fell in love, and had relationships with lots of humans, if you like. But Marduk, when Marduk fled, there was what you would call a nuclear war, and that's why there is nuclear glass in Egypt in the deserts, and why the burnt pyramid is black, and why it was burnt and how. When he fled, he left everything behind to his children, to the children of Ra, and they were referred to in English as the Ra-childs. Now that bloodline goes all the way back to Marduk and Anunnaki, and that's why they believe they're different to us, superior to us, because they go back to a ruling, the very first ruling class, the very first, if you like, rulers of the world, our very creators, is in their bloodline. That's how far they go back. Yeah. And their DNA is different to ours. They have a blood group that we do not know of. We don't know what their blood group is. So whether you're looking at Trump, Bush, Winston Churchill, Adolf Hitler, it doesn't matter who you're looking at. Charles Windsor, our current king, our fake king. If you look at any of those bloodline families, they're all Rothschilds by blood.
Yes.
And that's how far they can go back. So they believe that they have a God-given right to rule, because God to them is their forefather. Yes. Or forefathers, the Anunnaki, going back to Anu. But obviously they're not really called the Anunnaki. They're called Sam, S-A-M, Sam, and they don't have names. It's just what we've given them. But it's the same story with the Elohim. Most cultures in the world have traditions where they talk of people coming, these light beings coming from somewhere else and showing them how to build. And that all happened after the flood. They'd wiped out Atlantis. They'd wiped everything out. We were overpopulating. Apparently we were breeding like rabbits. We were at some points where there were areas in the world where we didn't have enough food. We were killing and eating each other. They decided to flood it and start again, but save enough people in certain areas. And obviously they then built these ships that had seed banks on them and also carried DNA on them, so they could start again with certain animals and so on. And that happened across the world. It wasn't just one person with a wooden ship. It was a bit more techie than that.
Yeah. Well, that gets us to the repopulation, I guess. And, people have been digging up these old Cabbage Patch Kids postcards and posters and movies. And even some of the elites and the royals collected these. Heidi Love did a good podcast about this. And she spoke about how some of them had collected 10,000, 20,000 of these kids, these... what do they call
pickled
them?
Punks.
Pickled punks. These little kid fetuses in these jars, and that was almost like a proud thing to see who had the most of them. And a lot of them look like they're genetically tinkered experiments. And the sheer number of these things is incredible. And do you want to maybe talk about Yeah, that repopulation, and did it
Mm,
happen underground, or what are your theories?
yeah.
Yeah, how did it all play out?
So the first thing is to look at the population. The world population estimated in 1776, it was 770 million people. 100 years later, it had doubled. Now that's quite hard to achieve through natural process. That's quite hard to double the population because although people were having larger families then, very few actually made it to adulthood. Not many of the children survived. You've also got lots of outbreaks that happen from cholera um, to ultimately leading towards the early 1900s with Spanish flu. A lot of people died. In fact, 3.35 billion people died. So in a
Yes.
period of 100 years where they're able to double the population, over twice the number of people by the time you're at 1876, over twice the number of people had died during that period of time. So we know that the population figures are out, completely out. We know they doubled the population at the same time most males died, most male adults had died, about 80%. If you look at the number of people killed in all of the wars that took place and the acts of genocide. Then you suddenly see the emergence in the late 1800s of these postcards that you mentioned, the Cabbage Patch postcards. They're also known as repopulation postcards, Babylon postcards. They refer to the mass repopulation of Caucasian babies. And the cards depict that. Alice Guy, the movie narrator and director, brought out a film in the late 1800s called The Cabbage Fairy, and that was followed by Midwife to the Upper Class, where she's growing babies in Cabbage Patch and then selling them to people when they come along to her stall to buy one. She was inspired to write that first movie, having seen the incubator babies in one of the World's Fairs that took place in Paris. But what they don't tell you is the film came out a year before the World's Fair. So people were put in place to indoctrinate and brainwash. And that's what they did. So, right in plain sight, they show you that they are literally growing babies. And this is being done in underground labs. They're growing that are now dumbs. These dumb bases were there, they've been there forever.
Yes.
Um, and all of a sudden, all across, particularly the Northern Hemisphere, but also being shipped to Australia, you have children that descend from cloning. So you've got the adults. Most of the male adults have died in war. Those that were able to fight have died. The mass majority have died in the civil wars and Napoleonic wars.
Yeah.
Those that stayed behind or survived were given an option. They followed New World Order or they would go to prison. And if they kept talking about things, they would go to an asylum. Because asylums, prisons as we know them today, and orphanages opened overnight in every major town and city in the world from nowhere, with
Yeah.
thousands of people being committed. Um, they introduced the Lunacy Act, and the Lunacy Act meant that if your husband had died in battle, you would be automatically considered insane if you had children. So if you were a widow with kids and your husband had died, then you would be taken to an asylum and your children sent to an orphanage. And that was part of the Lunacy Act. They wanted the kids. So they basically locked everybody away. The people that managed to survive or didn't go to war most of them were incarcerated. But then what they did with the people that were still wandering around serving a function is a number of things. They gassed them in their workplaces with noxious gases that kept them subdued, stopped them from thinking. That was called the heirloom. James Tilly Matthews is the person that actually broke the news on that, and that came out in the 1800s. So James Tilly Matthews is worth looking at. So they were gassing people in workhouses, in churches, even in Parliament. They were then adding mercury inside people's hats, and there was this big push for everybody to wear a hat. There was mercury used to seal the inside of the hat, and they weren't aware of it at the time, but they were getting what was referred to as Mad Hatter's disease.
Yeah.
They were again subdued, so everybody was kind of permanently stoned
Yeah.
and not able to really compute what's going on. They just went along with it. So they've been poisoning us for a long time, but that was a key part of it, to attack the mindset of the people that were still out there wandering around.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. A lot of people have got similar theories about what's going on now in terms of people being so dumbed down, and attention spans is the big one where people actually can't sit down and watch a documentary that goes for an hour anymore. People have to be on a screen 5 seconds at a time with more dopamine. So that completely makes sense. And the other thing that governments around the world are doing is, if you don't believe them, they're basically making you a criminal now. If you believe in conspiracies, and particularly in Australia, they're cracking down. Even just today, they've started taking guns off people for their social media posts if they don't believe the official narrative. So it's like they're preparing for this next reset. And as you say, those asylums that just pop up everywhere for people that don't go along with the narrative, will get labelled crazy, and you're going to get medicated to death by the government. And you can see that happening now. It is just crazy that history is repeating.
And it does. It does, because it's always written by the same people. And now, like you said, they're doing the same thing again. Control is coming back in. We're really seeing, our freedom of speech go out the window. And they're pushing for digital ID. Over here, we have the Antichrist himself being the main driving force behind it, Tony Blair. That man is not what people think. I mean, most people obviously despise him. But you need to go and read the blog on my website if you want to know who he really is. First of all, he's a Rothschild. And secondly, Dolores Cannon and Nostradamus predicted him. There's an MI5 document about him that he certainly wouldn't want reaching the public domain. But he put clues in his autobiography about who he really is. You just got to read between the lines if you could stomach reading a whole book about him.
There's some similar interesting theories deep down some rabbit holes about Australia's Prime Minister as well, who doesn't, officially on record, didn't grow up with his dad and stuff like that. But, I'll let people do their own research on that one. But
we've got to be careful what we say. But, so that's what we're seeing now. Like you said, we're being poisoned. People's attention span's gone out the window on purpose. They don't want us looking too deeply into things. They want us constantly distracted. And the headline news is always the same. The headline will be a lie. The real news is much further on in the paper in small articles lost in between others. Yes. We've got this big push now to celebrate certain people. We need to celebrate someone because they've sold a few records, celebrate someone because they can kick a football better than somebody else. And we call them stars or celebrities. I'm not sure why we're supposed to celebrate them, but they're a huge distraction and part of the system. So, I'd tell everybody that the best thing you can do is turn the news off. And I say this to people that share news clips with me all the time. And they say, well, no, I like to watch the news because I like to see what they're doing to hurt us this time. I said, but you're sharing it with me and I've asked you not to. The fact that you've shared it with me is working. That is how propaganda works. You are telling me that you're so clued up and so awake that it doesn't affect you. It's affected you to the point where you felt compelled to share it with somebody else.
Yeah.
Now, you've got to turn it off. You mustn't engage with the news. Propaganda doesn't work if no one's watching.
I completely agree with cutting it out, and that's toxic. I guess I still like to keep an eye on it to break down what is really happening, because I get a lot of messages from people saying...
not.
Okay.
That's kind of my argument, that what they're telling you is not what's happening. What they're telling you is what they want you to think is happening. What they're doing right now is something else entirely, and we're kind of all focusing on, I don't know, Charlie Kirk, or whatever is in the news today, a protest somewhere. While we're looking at that, they're doing a dozen other things they don't want us paying any attention to.
So I definitely agree. Yeah.
I kind of just say to people, turn it off. I don't care what's in the news today. What I'm trying to do is expose these bastards for who they really are. And if everyone just stopped watching the news and said, that's it, no more, no newspapers, no radio, I'm not sharing anything, I'm going to change my social media feed. How does propaganda work if no one's watching?
Yeah. I guess the only reason I still like to try and explain something like the Charlie Kirk incident, for example, for people is because I get a lot of messages from people saying, "Hey, that did wake me up," when obviously what the news is saying isn't true, and it started a lot of people on the journey, and they're my favorite messages to get from people saying, "Hey, one of
Yeah.
those videos you did really woke me up," and now they're on their own journey and they're not going to watch the news anymore, and they're going down rabbit holes. So that's the sort of thing that I really think that it's important to still have some conversations. But let's.
But it probably works with you because you're awake. But for the people out there that think they're awake, the news still has an effect on them.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of people that I'm urging. I mean, if you're watching the news to see what's going on, and say David Icke and Max Egan, people like that are watching it, they're looking at it, they know it's all a lie, and they're kind of trying to work out why they're telling us this is the important story today.
Yeah.
Because it will be obviously a lie and a distraction from something else that's more significant going on. When you know how it works, it's different, but most people don't. Most people will watch the news and say, "Oh, look what they've done now, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to tell everyone what they're doing." And that is the propaganda at work. But if you're looking at it to pick it apart, or if you're looking at it and saying, "Okay, Charlie Kirk, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, we now need to look at what else happened that day.
Yeah.
What are they putting through right now they don't want us to know about? There's something going on, and this is the distraction this week." And you kind of then use it to decipher. Well, you can use that to then act as a trigger for realizing something significant's going on.
Yes.
This isn't it. This is a warning to look elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think the litmus test for people is, does it trigger you emotionally? So when I'm watching, an event unfold, if you're getting triggered emotionally and still picking sides, then you haven't, kind of worked out what's really going on yet. You've got to step back and go remove emotion and be unbiased and figure out why they're doing something and how does this play into the New World Order plan and so on. But
it would be like another 9/11 event today. If I saw another 9/11 event, I suppose my first thing would be to look to see how much more advanced the CGI is now to when it was when that event happened. And my first thing would be, wow, well, first of all, how many people are going to fall for it this time? Secondly, wow, that plane looked more real than the one from 9/11.
Yeah.
They've really progressed. I'd be looking at how much more advanced this hoax is.
Yeah.
So I'd maybe looking at it from a different angle.
But let's get back to the sort of repopulation. And you spoke about how some people maybe can't wake up. So, even mainstream research now is talking about genetic memories or epigenetics and traits that get passed on through generations. So I guess that ties into everything that you're talking about. But what about the spiritual aspect as well? And some people saying, oh, they don't have a soul, and people talking about NPCs has become a popular term now in mainstream. And what are the different aspects that you believe are actually valid versus some of this stuff that's just a bit new age or wishy-washy in terms of that human consciousness into cloning and that?
Yeah, first of all, I think anything living has a soul, and it's what you define as a soul. What is it? And I think it's your aura. It's what makes you you. It's the reason you might like pink instead of green. It's the reason you might have ketchup on your burger and I have mustard. What makes you you, I think, is what we are describing as a soul. But every living being is connected. We all have a connection. And many people will say, well, clones don't. My argument would be, you need to show me your scientific research to substantiate that. You can't just come out with something like that. Because ultimately, whether you believe in the Epic of Gilgamesh or not, or you believe in the Old Testament, and I always suggest to people that if they're going to read the Old Testament and then start actually repeating parts of it and going around telling people about it, God said this, God said that, you need to read it properly. You also need to read the Epic of Gilgamesh because you'll then see where it came from. And we know that it's a lot older. So if we were created in the image of the gods, but not quite as intelligent and as and advanced, then we are all clones. We were mass produced. So how can you now say that we have a soul, but these NPCs don't because they were cloned.
Mm.
Everything's been cloned. Ultimately, it comes from a place where it was created en masse. I think what they're talking about is memory in DNA. So we know that the memories from our ancestors are passed on in our DNA, and our DNA, like water, holds memory.
Yeah.
So you will have an inbuilt feeling that things aren't quite right. This isn't how we're supposed to live. I'm questioning authority. I'm staring the window out. I'm staring out the window at school because nothing they're saying resonates with me. It doesn't really make sense. It almost seems pointless, and that's because we're taught the wrong maths. We're taught the wrong history. We're taught the wrong geography. We're taught to speak an English language that includes words that are just designed to trick us and get us almost casting spells on ourselves. Um, we have PE, and normally with a teacher that perhaps looks like they shouldn't be looking after children. In my experience, when I was a kid, they always look kind of dodgy looking back now.
Yeah.
It was all wrong. Um, the people that were mass produced from this Cabbage Patch cloning that took place in the 1800s, they don't have ancestry past that. They can go onto ancestry.com and be given some fictitious information that isn't real, but they'll never be able to corroborate any of it, substantiate any of it. Um, so you've got the people that are awake, that are awake because they have this gut feeling that just think this isn't right. I don't agree with any of this. This isn't how we're supposed to live. And that's your ancestors shouting at you saying energy was free, travel was free. You know,
Mm.
we had everything we needed, that we weren't whipped all the time. We weren't slaves to any system. We lived in harmony and balance with everything around us. Um, you've got that. These NPCs, as we refer to them, don't. They don't carry that. And unfortunately, that is estimated to be 80% of the world.
Yeah.
So there's just 20 that we might say we are the 99%, we're going to rise up. It's 20%.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you think the missing children, so much more has been coming out these days about child trafficking and that? How do you think that ties into it all as well? Do you think a lot of these, when we hear thousands of children going missing, do you think they could already be underground in these military bases, like you're saying, for the next repopulation and reset? Or do you think that, they've gone somewhere else? Or how do you think that ties into it this time?
Ultimately, I don't know, but I was shown some videos that I wished I hadn't seen at the start of the conflict in Ukraine really goes back to 2012, but more recently, when it started to heat up, when NATO, decided to point warheads at Moscow, obviously on purpose to wind up Putin and ignite something going on there. Obviously, they're all friends, they're all related, so it's only theatre. But I was exposed to some videos that showed some of the bioweapon facilities in Ukraine and skips full of children
Yeah.
that had
Yeah.
been experimented on. I mean, hundreds of them. So I think they lose a great number of children that are being used for experiments. I think some of them are being taken somewhere else. I don't know where. But Stephen King, the writer Stephen King, the horror
Yeah. Yeah.
writer,
Yeah.
he was tweeting at the same time that Mars needs more children. He kept tweeting it. So I think some of them are being, obviously Mars isn't up there. It's on here, just further out where we can't go, beyond the ice wall or wherever. But obviously there's nothing going on really up there.
Yeah.
So I think they're using children to repopulate certain places already, and I also think that a lot of children are being used for nefarious purposes by these people
Yeah.
and their friends or allies, maybe in exchange for technology. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I think a lot of them are being used for rituals.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything we haven't touched on today, Guy, that is some of your favourite things to talk about or important for people at home to know? And then finally, I want to get to how do you think we survive this the coming reset?
I suppose everything that I put out there is on my social media. So um, and all of my information, and incidentally, all of the books that I bought when I started researching, I've listed in the back of my first book. So Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids, which is about Tartaria, I've put all of the old books in there that I purchased. So if people want to go and find references for themselves and read these old books, they can see where I got a lot of the information from. But there is something, if people are interested, if they email me, I can send them a link to the FBI document that was released in 1999 that shows exactly how the suppression of Tartaria worked, who did it, how long it took, and so on. I have that document. So if people want a quick read to see that what we're talking about happened and it was caused by the people that we're talking about, then I actually have that document, and I'm happy to share that. And so it's not FBI, CIA.
I think I've seen some of that. Some of that's floating around on Twitter. Maybe, yeah. Interesting.
Right. I don't. Yeah, I don't really go. They banned me Twitter, so I opened an X account, but I don't go on there because I was told that the reason for X is to have a platform of people that they basically have a list of that are speaking out against the
Yes.
system, and it's got them all in one place. The
Yeah.
same thing with Telegram, that they're obviously monitoring the information on there and building up files on everybody. So I thought, well, I might as well be as obvious as I can and just stick with bloody Facebook then, if that's what X and Telegram are about. It makes no difference where I'm putting this stuff.
I think I
I'll
think
just give
all of them.
myself one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought, well, when and obviously, as soon as Musk got hold of Twitter, you smell a rat straight away. All of his money's government funded. We know what he's about now.
Yeah.
So I don't, I don't go on there so much.
And how's the best way to try and survive the reset? Is it just getting out to further out of these cities and having your own food, being able to live off the land, that type of thing, or
Yeah, it's easier said than done, isn't it? I think first of all, the main thing is I think you need to, like I said, I keep pushing this, and I probably sound like a broken record, but you've got to turn the news off. That's the first thing. You've got to desensitize yourself, so you're no longer exposed or reacting to what's going on today. You've got to completely switch all of that off. The next thing I think you've got to do is look at what you're eating. Where was it grown? What's in it? Actually start looking. Make sure you're filtering your water. Try and eat clean. Don't eat fast food or heavily processed foods. And if you can, and not everybody can, but if you are able to, then definitely growing your own produce would be a brilliant idea. Even if it's a window box and you're just growing a few tomatoes or so, it's something. It's a start, isn't it? We can all do that. So I think failing that, you've got to try and shop locally. You might have a farm shop near you and it's a bit more expensive. That's normally the case, but you have to look at the nutritional value. If you're eating a potato that's a real potato, it might cost twice the price, but you'll only need the one. You won't need to shovel half a dozen of them down you because you're getting everything you need from one. One small steak and one decent sized potato that's actually real is going to give you more nutritional value and more sense of being fulfilled, if you like, than 3 times the quantity that's mass produced. So I think you've got to look at what you're eating, what you're looking at, how much time you're spending online, how much time you're spending under artificial light. I think you need to get outside and ground, take your shoes and socks off, ground yourself, and kind of remember that we're not supposed to be inside under artificial light. We're not supposed to be looking at a screen. We're not supposed to peel plastic off of our food. That isn't what we're supposed to do. And I think we just need to look at that. And also, I think there are some fantastic doctors out there and people that go into it for all the right reasons. But there are also a lot that have become salesmen for pharmaceutical companies.
yes,
And I think maybe looking at alternative medicines. I'm not saying anything wacky, but something as simple as I've got a headache. Well, eating 10 almonds will get rid of that.
yeah,
You might just need some Celtic salt and a glass of water because you're dehydrated. There are ways to deal with things. We don't need to rush to get another packet of tablets.
absolutely,
And ultimately spend more time with people in the present. Don't use social media as a way of saying, well, I don't need to pop and see my friend because they see my feed every day and they know what I have for dinner because I take photos of it.
yeah,
They know everything I do because I post everything I do. Go and see them. We need to spend more time with each other, and we need to be outside while we're doing it. But unity, ultimately, the one thing they hate is us standing up together and saying, my wife's Muslim, my mother's Jewish, my dad's Roman Catholic. My my grandfather's, one for grandfathers from Ukraine, the other one's from down here in Devon. So I'm a mixed bag of everything. My best friend's black, my wife's mixed race. So I kind of couldn't care less what color someone is, what religion they are, as long as they're not ramming it in my throat, or what sexuality they are. I think we've got to look at each other as though we're all ultimately trying to do the same. We want to survive, and we want to be well, and we want to be happy, and we want to be loved and love.
Yes.
And I think we need to forget all the other stuff, what color you are, what you believe in, what language you speak. If we stand together, just the 20% of us, if we stand together and unite, we can change history overnight.
I really hope we do. It's good versus evil, as I always say, in this battle that we seem to be in. Yes, it's a great place to finish. And Guy, I'll put the links to all your socials down below. Guys, I highly recommend checking out Guy's YouTube channel, his website and everything. And we'll have to have you back on again in future, mate.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.